75 at O'Hare. Next news 7:30. And Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan and Amy continues next on AM 560. The Answer.
This hourly segment is brought to you by In the Know with Wealth Management Group, hosted by Craig Bolanos. Heard Sunday mornings at 10.
This is Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft and Amy Jacobson on AM 560. The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. Are threats ratcheting up? The threat of war, is that ratcheting up after some confrontations between the Brits and the Iranians in the Strait of Hormuz last week? Well, I don't think so, but we'll ask experts. Lieutenant Colonel James Carafano will also talk a little immigration policy as well as big tech. Peter Thiel, one of the President Trump's big backers, had some choice words at a conference about Google. Want to get Jim Carafano's reactions to. So let's go to him now. He is Vice President of the Catherine and Shelby Cullum Davis Institute for International Studies at the Heritage Foundation and author of books including Wiki at War, Conflict in a Socially Networked World, and Private Sector Public Wars, Contractors in Combat. Jim, thanks for joining us again. Appreciate it.
Hey, good to be with you.
So the Iranians and the Brits and that conflict that they had, Straits of Gibraltar to the Strait of Hormuz, does that mean we're any closer to a war between Iran and the West?
I don't think so. Like I said before, most of these activities are kind of things in kind, so they don't necessarily reflect escalation as kind of activities that are similar to kind of what they did before. So the other thing is, and I think this is always a challenge when we deal with the Iranian regime, is it's not a coherent whole. It's not like when President Trump says, do this, everybody does that. There are factions and elements in the regime that could often be acting independently. So when you see something happening at the tactical level, the first thing you have to figure out is that directly signaling from the rulers in Tehran, or is that just somebody kind of showboating and trying to drive foreign policy on their own? So I think the red line here, clearly for the U.S., has been if you're killing or detaining human beings, then we have a problem. In this case, the British deterred that, so that may I think that's something that stays below the threshold.
And is this these incidents are they indicative of Iran really being hammered by the sanctions? Their economy prompting them to take more bellicose measures to try and get attention and do something about the sanctions that are crippling it?
Well, I think the Iranians must be smart enough. I mean, I don't know. I'm not in Tehran, but I mean, they've got to be smart enough to figure out that the Europeans, or pressuring the Europeans, is not going to get them out of sanctions. And it's very unlikely the U.S. is going to back down. What these seem more to be is to be provocative, and then in tandem with that, to do the enriching. So if Trump does get reelected, and this is the guy they face, and they have to go back to the negotiating table to get out from underneath the sanctions, they have something to negotiate with. Oh, we can be less bellicose, we can back off on our processing. So I think that seems to add up to the plan.
Well, how do you see this ending?
Well, I think we're in a status quo which could sustain for some time. I think particularly until the Iranians decide what exactly the Europeans can and can't do and where this administration is going. I think there's a strong expectation, or there could well be, that, look, if Trump doesn't get reelected, we've seen enough rhetoric from the other side. The United States could come back. They could rejoin the deal. We might have to, do nothing. All you have to do is tough it out for 18 months. So, from the Iranian standpoint, maybe that's a bet worth taking. What happens? I mean, they can certainly tough through 18 months. If in 18 months they're no better off than they were before and Trump is still there, then they can start negotiating.
Billionaire tech investor Peter Thiel had some choice words over the weekend in a speech he gave covering big tech as well as war. He basically had some pointed questions for Google, like how much of Google's technology has been stolen by China? How much of their staff processes are compromised by China? Why do they work for the Chinese government but refuse to work with the U.S. government? He also suggests that their big AI project is dual use, and much the way he suggests the hydrogen bomb work back by Teller and Oppenheimer was dual use, although Google's not transparent about the military use. That's a lot there with respect to Google, but since you are knowledgeable in this space, are those good questions that he should be asking? And then maybe is that the area where a big tech company like Google should really be the source of the most concern?
Well, I mean, I think those are legitimate questions. I think it's not just questions to ask of Google. Having talked to several Google executives, that's, I think, a question that Google is asking itself. Indeed, a lot of big tech companies are asking themselves on the front of, are we giving away technologies which potentially have tremendous national security implications? That is something increasingly which falls under the purview of what's called CFIUS, which is a process that we have that looks at investments of foreign countries in the United States. The other thing is we have a regime for this if that is a legitimate concern, which is under limits on what national security technologies you can export. So I think in fairness to all of us, we are all going into this world. I mean, just a few years ago, a lot of us were debating, well, China will be fine, or it won't be fine, or everything else. I think the majority of politicians, corporate executives in America have realized that China's rise is not benign, and there are real national security threats to us, and now we're well past the time to start a serious discussion of how do we address them. And
so Thiel apparently called for like an FBI, CIA look at these questions that he's raising. Do you think that's legitimate, or do you think the internal processes at the Pentagon and the oversight entities there can handle this matter? I mean, I think in fairness that there's an awful lot of intelligence activity already going on in this area. One of the reasons why countries using Huawei technology in their emerging 5G networks, these are new telecom wireless networks that require new software and hardware. The cheapest purveyor of that is China, but an awful lot of intelligence work has been done to demonstrate there are massive, significant security risks that are engendered in that. So, I mean, that's indicative, I think, of the fact the intelligence community is already spending a lot of time in this area. Just sticking in the tech area for a moment, but intersecting with presidential politics, Kamala Harris said over the weekend on a radio program that we already know that Russian bots are targeting my campaign. Is that something that she could possibly know?
Yeah, actually, it is possible that they could know that. I mean, that's not super high tech, that hard to figure out. Look, here's what we know about Russian disinformation operations. They're not targeted really for or against anybody. They're targeted to achieve maximum disruption in the American polity. I mean, or in other countries that are attacking. It's not so much the outcome they achieve, but if they're undermining credibility, if they're undermining integrity, then they're happy. And so the answer is deal with it. And we all know that Russia is a bad actor, and that's just something that we have to be prepared for. Look, let's not pretend that this never happened. It had never happened in American history. Before the outbreak of World War II, all the adversaries, Russians, the Germans, the Japanese, the British, to their extent, tried to get involved in influencing U.S. politics. Right? This is a fact of life that external actors try to do this. They have new tools to do with that, but the impulse is not new. But in the end, and this is, I think we have to make a distinction between that and Americans have the capacity to make up their own mind of what they want and don't want. So on the one hand, I would say don't blame your political successes and failures on external actors. But on the other hand, we should all recognize that external actors are trying to do that, and it's bad and unacceptable behavior.
Now, yesterday was supposed to be the big ICE roundup. 2,000 people were supposed to be taken into custody in various cities, mostly sanctuary cities around this country. It didn't happen. Does President Trump, does this make him look weak?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know what the plan was, and I don't know what the plan is. I would say that arresting 2,000 people unlawfully present in this country is not exactly my idea of a roundup or a raid. We have about 1 million people in this country who have what's called a valid deportation order, which means they've exhausted every single legal means they have under the Constitution to legally remain in this country. And theoretically, if any of them were picked up any day of the week, they would be put through an expedited removal process and sent out of the country. I don't know, what the plan is. There are a number of factors that you have to think about. Among the other ones are people actively trying to thwart your ability to follow the law, which is not good. But then also, even people that you're going to put through an expedited removal process have to be detained, and there's got to be questions about capacity and stuff for that, because that'll immediately be an issue that they're also challenged about. So they have to be smart about how they do this. But there's plenty of people out there that should be appropriately picked up and removed from the country.
He is Lieutenant Colonel Jim Carafano, retired, Vice President of the Catherine and Shelby Cullum Davis Institute for International Studies at Heritage, Wiki at War, Conflict